Hi, good evening, everyone. I'm Dr. Colleen Rogers, CEO of Equity Consulting Group, a nonprofit started by four talented scholar practitioners for the purpose of promoting equity in education and transforming educational spaces. Be it K-12 schools, universities, or other nonprofits, we build capacity to create and sustain liberating, anti-racist, humanizing, and effective places of learning. When working in schools and districts, our theory of action generally centers sustainable solutions for excellence in both teaching and learning. Upon completing a robust needs assessment with an equity lens, we often find that an intervention in CRSE curriculum design and implementation is needed, content and pedagogical deep dives, and/or culturally competent mindset shifts. We typically find that some, if not all of these elements are needed for doing and owning this critical work. Our instructional coaches here at ECG work with and for you in reaching clear and measurable goals. We look forward to connecting with you after the webinar if you're interested in talking more about partnership. Thank you. All right. Hey, everybody. Good evening. We are live, and I am super excited to be in this space at this time with you all. I'm Colleen Rogers, CEO of Equity Consulting Group, and one of your moderators for tonight. I'm also a girl mom ×2, a fourth grader and an eighth grader, so I'm invested in this conversation in more ways than one. I'm also the STEM expert on our team, and I enjoy traveling the world, especially during the winter months, looking for good Caribbean carnivals. I know those join, as well as those who will watch this later, are taking time out of their busy schedules for a reason, right? Whether it's to connect, to reflect, or to gain clarity. And so I honor that and I say thank you. Thank you for joining my partners, the panelist, and I in this important conversation about policy, politics, and equity. I'm confident that tonight seeds will be planted for important work ahead. And now I'm going to hand it off to my partner, Ms. Jacoby Bell. She's going to give a brief introduction of herself and pass it on.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jacoby, one of our resident literacy experts, as well as the Chief Strategies Officer for Equity Consulting. I love to salsa dance. I'm a global traveler, Colleen. I chase the sunsets too, especially in cold weather. And I'm excited to be with you all here today. With that, I'll pass it to Reshma.
Hi, everyone. I'm also excited to be here with all of you in partnership today. My name is Dr. Reshma Rimkelwan. I am the Chief Operating Officer of Equity Consulting Group, as well as a literacy expert on our team. I am also a girl mom ×2, a fifth grader, and a preschooler. I know, it's a big gap. And like my wonderful partners, I love being in warmer climates, traveling the world, and just being by a really solid, peaceful body of water. It is my pleasure to introduce our panelists this evening. I'm going to go ahead and start with Miguel Suarez. Miguel Suarez is an educator with over 25 years of experience. Born and raised in the Bronx, Miguel began his career as a math educator. He helped to co-found a successful charter school in the South Bronx. He has been in the roles of community advocate, excuse me, assistant principal, and co-executive director. In his current capacity, he leads the P-Tech program for Brewster Central School District. It's also a pleasure to introduce Bryza Sterling. Bryza Sterling is a critically conscious educator and learning experience artist who has implemented culturally responsive instruction as a humanities teacher in New York City schools for over a decade. As a Bronx native, Riza used her role as an educator to not only elevate her impact on the genius of New York City youth, but to empower other educators to do the same. She continues to facilitate staff development and coaches new teachers on equitable practices and culturally responsive curriculum development, in addition to developing her own curriculum with a focus on social justice and equity. Riza holds an undergraduate degree in English adolescent education, a master's in literacy, and an advanced certificate in TESOL from CUNY Hunter College. Riza serves as an adjunct lecturer in the adolescent literacy and English department at CUNY Hunter College, as well as writes lessons on critical social topics, such as a freelance writer for Learning for Justice. And finally, it is also my pleasure to introduce Howard Jean. As the CEO of BMA, Howard leads a mission-driven organization dedicated to empowering 1 million Black, Indigenous, and people of color citizens and women to excel in the ever-evolving field within the next 5 years. Their mission? To creatively transform the journey from K to J, kindergarten to job placement, and ignite the potential of BIPOC individuals in future tech industries as consummate professionals while bridging the wealth and tech equity gap. Jean's work in entrepreneurship, education, and minority males and community service has earned him the respect of his peers and the admiration of those he serves. In September of 2024, Howard participated in the Vice President Kamala Harris and Oprah Winfrey discussion on the campaign trail with President Biden and Harris, and has been a guest on numerous occasions to the White House as a guest to speak on the need for more funding for Black male lead businesses. Welcome to our wonderful panelists. We will have the opportunity to answer your questions, so feel free to drop them in the chat throughout the discussion. We will hold questions until the end. Colleen, turning it back to you.
Thank you, Dr. Reshma. So for the next few minutes, we want to begin this conversation talking about key policy changes and opportunities. We know that all stakeholders in many educational systems across America are impacted as politics change, policies and priorities are mandated, and as resources get restricted or expanded at the district and state level, according to those priorities. And so we know that this cycle really is nothing new, right? It's the way our system and government works. However, given how drastically, I would say, the political pendulum has swung over the past 8 to 12 years, I'm wondering first to the panelists, and Howard, I'm going to start with you. I'm wondering first about what you may be anticipating for the upcoming changing of the guard.
Yeah, so first of all, good evening. I'm gonna put my Meta Ray-Ban glasses on because I am the technologist here today.
Yes.
Yeah, so it's gonna be very interesting. First of all, I want to give kudos to you ladies, Latrice, for organizing this, but for what you all are doing. You're not only practitioners, but you're actually really having real change in the field, not just behind the laptop. I'm all about educators, parents, community advocates, even politicians getting into the streets and really doing the work. Which kind of goes into, I guess my first talking point is that with the change in administration, as they're moving from the federal education and the responsibilities of the feds and education, they're kind of pushing that responsibility to the state and local. I think it gives a lot of opportunity for parents to organize and mobilize in a way that they've never been able to before. As a former educator and professor, we know the bureaucracy in education and the classroom. But at this point, this is an opportunity where chaos meets clarity on the ability and the responsibility that parents have to really shift the responsibility to local politicians and the school board. So I'm always speaking about how the first classroom is in the house, is in the home. And I think that's going to really empower students, but also parents to really step up to the plate, be empowered to activate their superpowers of insight, clarity, and also their priorities when it comes to principles that they see fit for their family and their community.
I love that. Yeah, that does make me excited, right? To have that voice and agency in the system.
Right.
Thank you for that. So we do know that President-elect Donald Trump has named his transition co-chair, Linda McMahon, as his pick to serve as the next Secretary of the Department of Education.
Mhm.
I'll share that according to Fox News, McMahon, who served as the administrator of the Small Business Administration in the first Trump administration, is wife of Vince McMahon and co-founder of WWE. According to CNN, she's the board chair of the America First Policy Institute, which is a pro-Trump think tank that prioritizes planning potential policy proposals for Trump's second term. So although President-elect has talked a lot about dismantling the Department of Education, we know that that's probably unlikely to happen considering the act of Congress that would be required. However, on the agenda, though, we know we keep hearing these buzzwords, right, around school choice, to your point, around parental rights, and privatization of public education. Words and initiatives around DEI, anti-racism, equity seem to be cooling in many areas. Many of those anti-racist commitments that were plastered across websites just a few years ago are no longer being prioritized. So my question to you, the panel, is, as we think about our locus of control and influence, how might schools and districts, and I think you alluded to some of this in your response, how might schools and district leaders, as we think about kind of that level in the system, how might they continue to prioritize equity in innovative ways as priorities shift and funding inevitably gets redistributed? What should remain at the core and how? So I'll start with you, Howard, and then I'll open it up to the other panelists.
Yeah. So, as a community representative with a voice today, I think it's a cool opportunity for educators and school districts to now partner with nonprofits and organizations like yours, where you all are able to leverage your insight, your expertise, but also being objective in how you approach solutioning. As a former educator from middle school to high school to college, we can become very stagnant in how we do things. Unfortunately, the whole idea of tenure does delay a lot of progress. So I think this is going to be an opportunity from some really innovative partnerships for parents. Parents can obviously take a more aggressive role with their PTA. We all know that a lot of PTAs aren't as active as they can be due to many factors, including work, economics, education, even their trauma with education, right, when they were students. However, I really feel that this is a really good opportunity for parents to mobilize, to engage, and then also to really get more feedback from the students, and also look at the changing guard of the workforce. As a technologist, and again, I love the VR. I use VR for
You got
workforce.
your
I'm here
gadget.
today. VR for workforce development and training. It really opens up an opportunity now for our parents and our teachers to really have I want to say a better foreshadowing and the skills that are more necessary for the workforce versus training students for a test. And we know that did come from the intense pressure from the feds. So we do know there is an opportunity to be very objective with being creative with, okay, well, how can we see light in the midst of this storm? And I really feel like this could be opportunity for us to really think about how we're training our students for the next workforce paradigm shift that's happening right before our eyes.
Absolutely.
So, so Howard, I'm gonna kind of like jump on that a little bit too, because I completely agree with you. I mean, we need to look at the way education has gone in the past 25 years. CTE programs have been dissolved. You have all these programs that, built college first. And as that's wonderful and that's great, it held back in a lot of our communities, South Bronx, Harlem, especially in New York, but spread throughout, right? Spread throughout this state, spread throughout New Jersey, all the tri-state area. There are all these neighborhoods that don't have the opportunities. We're sitting there trying to push college and everything, but the reality is this: we need to, sometimes those old ways are the best ways, right? And if we go back to it, we want to talk about how do we not necessarily solve equity, but create an equitable environment. The big thing is this idea of the workforce. What is the workforce looking for now, right? And you know, with the whole ideology, not getting into politics, but the whole ideology of America first, well, we need to look at what our manufacturing plants need. What do our you know, what is it that our youngsters are good at now, right? You know, they understand how to use all the tech, but do they know how to create the tech, right?
Right.
And
Mhm.
so, so I agree with you wholeheartedly on that. And you know, one of the main program that I have right now, where we deal with mechanical and electrical technology, it's this idea of if the kids don't want that, it sets them up for success because they'll look into, all right, maybe I will become a mechanical engineer, electrical engineer, right? Where
Mhm.
we're hungry for our kids to become those now, right?
Yeah,
Mhm.
And
yeah.
so I agree with you wholeheartedly. I just wanted to jump on there and say that.
Yeah.
You know?
No, and I want to throw this back to, at the equity consulting group. So, as we are being, you all consultants, so you go in, you identify a problem, you don't take a side. And so if you really had to look at what were some of the shortfalls and weaknesses in the current Department of Education, because this is where it's all about finding ways to meet common ground, right? It's not about one side being extremely right, one side being extremely left or extremely correct or wrong. But from your point of view, what are some critiques or some areas of change from your mass experience collectively, for you ladies? What are some ways that you've seen that the DOE has been stifling progress and development? Because that's where we're going to find our way to meet them in the middle and bring them on the journey to help, a concerted effort of changing, the future of our children.
I can start us off with that. I think the first thing that comes to mind is oftentimes when there's these large scale initiatives, reading, math, science, whatever the initiatives are, sometimes the student gets lost in the initiative, right? It's about the curriculum or it's about this data over here. It's about all the different things, but sometimes we lose the focus on like the student and their well-being and their assets in the learning, um, and that they come with something, right? Versus like assuming that they don't come with something and we have to like pour and teach everything to them. So I think for me, it's like if we can center the student in all of
Yeah.
this and thinking about like their needs, and what they're telling us and like asking them, and like actually listening to what they're telling us as well, that would be a good first step in this.
Yeah, I like that.
I know I'm not part of the the
Yeah, I'm about to
consulting.
say, Rise, and we saw you come off mute for sure. Jump in.
Yeah,
Yes.
come on, come on.
I wanted to add on to what everyone was saying. Like, and as someone who is part of, like, I went through the public education system in the Bronx, and then I became an educator in New York City.
Mhm.
I do see the pitfalls. And for me, it's more of, I think this is an opportunity to be creative, but also transformational. And I think like for a long time, especially in like the working class schools, we've been preparing kids for the workforce. And not that there's anything wrong with that, but I feel like now is the opportunity to take it a step further and not just like pigeonhole our kids into these positions where it's like you're working for someone else. I feel like that was always the option. Like you only had the option to go to college, to get a career, and to work for someone else, not become an entrepreneur, not have the courage to kind of like take things into your own hands. And
Mhm.
I definitely was a product of that. I feel like even today, I suffer from immense imposter syndrome because I'm like, oh, I'm not smart enough, or I'm not this. And for me, in teaching kids, I take the opposite role. I try to empower them, like you said, Jacoby, to make sure that they are centered in everything that I do so that they know like their potential is limitless. And even for me, it takes a lot to try to figure out what are those opportunities out there because we have like a limited list, especially as people of color. It's like these are the jobs that you can have, and these are the careers that you should go into, whether it's nursing, whether it's education. But anything beyond that, it's like I feel like it's not as accessible to us because we are used to a way of schooling that has been, put there to oppress us versus like liberate us. So I think like this is an opportunity for us to come together and just be transformational, ask the right questions, like just tear down and disrupt what school looks like across the board in our schools and just reimagine what it could be for our communities so that we can take the power back.
Mhm. Yeah, Thank you for that. I'll also name, thank you for that little plug. But yeah, so in our work, that objective lens that we enter into partnerships with, that equity audit, that needs assessment, we take a holistic approach, right? So we have focus groups with students and empathy interviews to really hear the voices and try to create a plan that really honors and centers that voice. I think another piece that I would say, if we wanted to critique or look for opportunities, is in the way that we center curriculum,
Mm.
I would say, right? So like, no matter how good it is never good enough for the students in front of you on a Tuesday, you know, in Milwaukee. Right? And so shifting from that lens of like teachers have to carry that heavy load of designing and creating lesson plans. And today I'm trying to figure out what I'm doing tomorrow to like taking a wider lens, getting something that's really strong, that high quality instructional materials, and building their lens for like curricular literacy. How do I then make it better? How do I adapt it? How do I make it more relevant to what's happening this week? Right? There's no way a curriculum designer for a big company in a room, 5 years ago, has the lens of like who your students are, what they need, what's interesting right now, and what's important. And so shifting teachers from that place of like, nope, you have to put this curriculum in place with fidelity, to implementing curriculum with integrity and what that means in different contexts, obviously without lowering the bar.
Yeah.
So those are, yeah, Howard, you want to close this out? Then I'll
Yeah,
go.
sure. And both to Miguel. First of all, I'm in Harlem World, shout out to, Harlem. I want to get them on the map. But also I see this as a really interesting opportunity to understand regional mapping. When we look at what each region of the United States needs for talent development, right? I grew up in South Carolina. So me and Latrice went
Okay.
to rival high schools. Shout out to Latrice Carter for doing her thing with organizing this.
Yeah.
However, what's needed in South Carolina when it comes to what we're developing and the B&W plan and the Michelin plant, those skill sets that are needed, it's much different than what's needed in New York City, what's needed in Minnesota, Milwaukee, California, and et cetera. So I think this is going to be a really interesting shift when we look at what does the region need from our students, from our community, and how can the region be more responsive or inclusive in the classroom, right? Bringing in these companies and corporations that say, okay, what's your forecast, right? As a government contractor, we look at forecasting, right? 10 years down the road, what's the government need? Well, we can do the same thing with industry and need in our classrooms, right? So what does the industry need over the next 10, 15 years in the Southeast or in the Northeast or et cetera? And we can align our teaching standards and our outcomes to that, but also to Rais's point, to also understand that there's always going to be need for innovation for small businesses, right? We all are somewhat small business owners and inclusive in that ecosystem. So I think meeting the male at both is going to have an amazing experience. And again, amongst chaos comes clarity and opportunity. So I'm really excited at what's ahead, and thank you all for allowing me to be here today.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much for that perspective. So I think we've created some sense of like macro context around policy and equity. So I'm going to hand it back over to Dr. Ramkelawan to talk more about the work of leaders in schools.
Thanks for that. Yeah, so in our conversation, we're going from macro to semi-micro to a little bit more micro in terms of thinking about what folks have control over within the school's specific context. So let's explore how school leaders can proactively navigate and adapt to ever evolving and shifting educational policies. Changes at the federal and state level create waves that reach every classroom, from funding allocations to curriculum mandates like we were just talking about. By understanding these shifts earlier on in the process, leaders can position their schools to thrive while maintaining a focus on student success and educational equity, which is really crucial at this juncture. So my first question to you, Miguel, is what advice would you have as a school and system leader for educators who seek to continue to center and humanize their students when legislation mandates might say otherwise?
So I'm gonna do what Howard did. I'm gonna thank you guys first off for allowing me to be here. So look, it's it it was a very, when I was thinking about this question, it was a very kind of like a very weighted question, right? You have to look at like several aspects here when you talk about school leaders, educators trying to balance, because you have the equity when it comes to economic. You have the equity when it comes to racial. You have the equity when it comes to gender, right? And so, there, with whichever I would say whichever political parties in office, it doesn't matter, right? We have to still maintain our status quo. We still have to do what we do, right? So, when we talk about the idea of humanizing, right? We still have to preach kindness, what we always do, right? We have to preach that understanding. I don't care what's going on outside of these doors, but within these doors, we still maintain what we do here, right? Everybody's allowed to get an education. Everybody's allowed to be safe within these walls, right? And it, as tough as it may be, it's, if you keep constant, it'll work, and it works, right? I was teaching in the Bronx for many years. By the time I hit upstate New York, I was under the first administration of Trump, then Biden, and then Trump again. It doesn't matter, right? And I hate to, because I don't like to give power where there is none, right? We do what we have to do here to help our students grow, right? And they have to grow in a culture where it's mixed. It's just what it is. Black, Latino, white, Asian, it doesn't matter. It is a mixed culture. So they all have to feel comfortable within that. And so I like how you said earlier, Colleen, about the whole like holistic approach, right? So within, and I'll say this, within our district here, we think of the student as a whole. We think of their family, right? We think of their needs, right? So we have food pantries here for the families, right? If the kids and the families are not eating, they're not going to learn, right? So we work on stuff like that. We have bilingual classes here in this district for families, right? We need to think of what will make the kid completely successful in the classroom, right? And we work on those levels as well. Of course, we always preach the DASA, right? Like you'll always preach DASA within whatever district you're in. But it's the idea of, with the worrying about legislative mandates, you try your living best to keep away from that, right? Because you spiral. And I find that happens a lot, right? People will spiral with, oh, worried about this, worried about that. But at the end of the day, we still have to teach. We still have to educate. We still have to push these students to go further, you know? So,
I want to just thank you for that, Miguel. So
Yeah.
DASA refers to the Dignity for All Students Act, which is a legislative mandate here in New York State that requires schools to be an inclusive space, regardless of gender identity, racial identity, and so on. And there are specific protections that are put into place. I appreciate you naming that we want to make sure that we're continuing to center students in our educational practices, because policies change and they shift. As you said, you've experienced both ends of the political spectrum in your time upstate. I'm wondering if you could possibly give us an example of how you've been able to maintain equity within your locus of control during these two presidencies, but particularly in thinking about the incoming president. What was your experience there?
That's great. Yeah. So it's very interesting. So one of the main reasons why I was hired under this district was to do this, what you introduced me as, the PTech program. I know Howard, you probably have a background on that as well, with all the idea. And it's this idea of giving an opportunity to individuals that wouldn't necessarily be within tech fields, right? And so these programs are still there, right? I know we talk about the changing of the guard, and we spoke about it earlier. So sorry if we're doubling down on that, but as long as we continue to do what we're doing. So for instance, I love, we do talk about, because, I'm of Latino background, I'm Puerto Rican background, everything that, and and I find that you can tend to go to race. But the reality is this, there's a whole gender thing as well, right? I'm speaking of four powerful women here, but the reality is this: the tech programs that I'm running out of the district, I'm trying to focus on women in technology and women in machinery as well, right? So there's all this whole factor of not just, black and brown, right? But young ladies, right? Building up that dynamic as well within the culture. And I have to tell you, this is now my third district upstate, and all three have been extremely supportive of it, right? Any programs that I bring in to help black and brown or young ladies, it doesn't matter, young ladies of color, young ladies in general, right? They're very supportive because it's a need, right? And I think that that's what we focus on, and everything we kind of dictate, especially when you're admin in whatever building you're in, it's always based off the need, right? And you see these students struggling, or you see these students not successful. And a lot of us are in the STEM field here, I just noticed. But in the STEM fields, we try our best to focus on that, right? If it's a need, you can't argue a need, right? You could be at whatever end of the spectrum you want. If there is a need, you can't argue it, right? And so I'll say when it comes to that, so a lot of the companies that I've partnered up with for Brewster, I mean, every time they go there, they're just like this. Yes, this is exactly who we're looking for. Yes, we'll work with this student, we'll work with that student. And it's they're still good in this world. I don't know if that like kind of makes sense, but there is, right? There's genuine people and goodness in this world that people still want to help and work.
Mm-hmm. I'll just jump and say that definitely resonates with me, as a woman of color who has a degree in chemical engineering. That equity piece is always on my mind, as I go into math classrooms. My scholarship is around math trauma in classrooms for parents, for teachers as well, and how that impacts the pipeline that we're trying to nurture, for students. So I think that's amazing. And what I also hear is like, you have to have focus on vision
Yes.
and a bit of courage, it sounds like, right? To continue to make
Mhm.
partnerships, because it's out there for you, right? That innovation, that kind of collaboration doesn't end. Those people are still willing, the need is still there. How do we continue to navigate the work, do the work?
100%.
Mhm.
Thanks for that, Colleen. I want to invite Howard and Riza to jump in and add your thoughts as well. Piggyback off of anything that Miguel shared.
Well,
Oh, well,
first,
yeah, go ahead,
sorry.
right. No, but please go ahead, ladies first, please.
I would like to name Miguel, you're amazing, but there's 5 powerful women on this call, not just
Oh,
4.
my apologies. You know what it is? I have the
Now,
video off. So the five
yes,
powerful
yes,
women.
yes.
Yes, my apologies.
Since we're talking about equity,
Yeah.
but in all of that, right? Like we are talking about equity, and when we're talking about women in general and women of color, I feel that yes, those opportunities are out there, but they're not always as easily accessible to
Mhm.
everyone. And I think like we need to do a better job at making sure that all of these opportunities meet kids where they are, because even as an educator, I feel like I'm always searching for some of these opportunities, and it's very difficult to find because there's so many other things that we're like that are thrown at us. And it's even thinking about earlier when you were talking about curriculum, like yes, curriculum is important, and I'm passionate about creating like culturally relevant curriculum for our kids. But it's like there's so many policies that go into place, so many like mandated curriculum we have to put inside. And then there's, I feel like just systemically, teachers are in a space where we're being suffocated. Like there's so much thrown at us that it's very difficult for us to continue our intellectual growth, like, and just reimagining how we approach our students and how we center our students, especially since every year we get a new batch and they're all different and very diverse. So it's just like, how can we create systems where teachers are empowered as well to continue their learning, to continue understanding students and how to approach them and how to pick the best curriculum and how to tear it apart and rebuild it, not just pick something up that someone gives us. Because ultimately, like, yeah, you have those teachers out there who don't really know their why and are kind of just like moving through and planning day to day. But then you have the teachers that are passionate and want to do the work, but just aren't in a space where that is made available to them, because
Mm-hmm.
just systemically it hasn't been a space where we are given just the willpower or even just the opportunities to take those risks and to be courageous with how we approach it, because it's just like very like the ability to make those mistakes is a very it's very tight. It's not, we're not able to do like make mistakes and, oh, let me just try this. Test is right around the corner. We need to make sure they pass that test. And I can be someone that's like, I don't care about the test, but for the most part, there are a lot of people who are like, no, we need to make sure we pass because our jobs are on the line when it comes down to it. So
Well, yeah. First, I'm going to speak to both Miguel's point and also Raisa. So, Raisa first, ladies first. One thing that my mission is to create a pipeline of 1 million BIPOC women and men in technology. And the past few years, I developed a lot of relationships with a lot of women-led tech organizations like Baddies in Tech, Black Women in Tech, Women in Tech, Black Women in Blockchain, and I can go on and on. And the opportunity there is to find collaboration, right? The reason why I came into technology, I was an educator. I got into cybersecurity, and I saw, okay, well, how can I fuse this whole situation and really profess a lot of my talents? And I think there's a great opportunity for each school district or even schools to have a technology advisory committee that is made of organizations like your equity consulting group, school districts, but also external organizations like the ones I mentioned, who are developing technologists, career changers, but with collaboration needs a lot of opportunities for new grants, new opportunities that this org may have opportunities for, that their foundations or corporations may be looking at, going back to what I said earlier, addressing the foreshadowing or the forecast of what's to come. So in a nutshell, I think it'd be great for school districts and organizations to lean into these new organizations that are focused on training women. Currently, Department of Labor has awarded one of my clients, the Vets Training Group, a grant to train women in machinery. So we're training women in machinery, giving them certifications, and my agency is placing them as apprenticeships and internships for corporations. And so there are opportunities, but external organizations like the Equity Consulting Group, Black Meta, and et cetera, can be that bridge to bring these organizations that you may not be able to see in your purview, that we are just, immersed with to the forefront and to create collaboration. And so I think that's the points that I wanted to mention about how we're looking at addressing the dearth of women in the workplace when it comes to technology and machinery and STEM, but also the opportunity that this present administration may bring with focusing on state and local engagement at a different capacity.
So can I add to that? So here's the thing
Last
too.
thought,
Yeah.
Miguel, go ahead.
My apologies. So thanks guys. That great points. I think too it's this, and I know that our whole goal here is to also give ideas to anybody watching as well. And I'll say this, it's marketing, right? It's marketing. And you're not just marketing to just the companies that want to work with your schools or want to work through whatever political change that there may be, but it's also the marketing to the students, right? And that could be kind of the hardest thing to do at times, but the whole
That's true.
idea, like, look, I'll say this, I'm running between two schools currently, right? A high school and a middle school, trying to run this program and then also be an AP, right? I'm still going to businesses and knocking on doors, cold calling, right? Not just the email. Don't give up easily, right? Because they are out there to help. But even with the students, you sit down and you talk to them, okay? And that's what happens, before we even got on this phone call, Rise, and I was talking about the difference between like admin and teachers and losing that personal connection. And I don't know about losing that personal connection because I'll sit down with kids, I don't care what age, right? They want to listen, they want to hear if we do a program like the one you're talking about, what does it lead to? Where does it grow? I had a conversation with a student in my classroom who wanted to do either a BOCES program or a college prep program, right? Like two extremes, right? And so we're sitting there, we're talking, and we I think as the people listening on this Zoom, on this webinar, you got to make sure you put in the time too for what we spoke about earlier, the kids first, right? And Riza, you brought that up earlier. The kids are first. They want to be heard, right? What do they want to know? You know, if they're nervous in this time, right? Okay, listen to their nerves, but then still give them a focus, like you were saying earlier, Colleen. Like focus. Here's what we can look at. Here's what we can offer you, right? You know, and if you hold on to that track, you're gonna be on this track longer than 4 years.
Thank you,
You know,
Miguel.
so.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. I really appreciate it. The theme that's coming up from all of your responses to these questions is, how are we continuing to empower our students? How are we continuing to feel empowered ourselves within our locus of control, particularly when federal and state mandates might come across in a way that make us feel as though we have no autonomy or no control over what we want to provide our students as learners, as humans, as future citizens. And so this is almost a perfect transition into thinking about the ways in which parents can be empowered to act as advocates for their children's educational equity and experiences through practical and direct involvement. And so I'm going to pivot over to Riza, who brings to us her experience as a parent and also as an educator. And I'm going to ask you this first question. What are some strategies for engaging diverse parent communities in policy advocacy?
So in thinking about this question, I thought automatically what we already do. So schools usually have like the parent night in the beginning of the year, or they'll have like the meet and greets with the parents, and or the culture day where it's like bring your food from your culture. And I think like that's good, but I feel like that's very surface. Like we're focusing on just things that are superficial. And I feel like that doesn't even get us fully in the door. It's just like, all right, we get it, we know the people, and then we move on from there. But it doesn't get parents wanting to come back. And I think, especially when we talk about creating safe spaces in our schools for our parents, it's like safe spaces don't look the same to every family. So we have to like really understand what safe means to our different or our diverse parents, our diverse families. And that takes having like deeper or more impactful meetings where it's like we can have team building activities. We can have like deep questions that we ask them, but things that really are going to leave a lasting impression in parents. And I'm definitely gonna like tap into my Goldie Muhammad because I love her. So in her book, Cultivating Genius, she talks about communities of practice. And so in thinking about creating communities of practice, we have to be more invested in learning about our family's histories, like the joy, but also the struggle. Like they're in it now. And a lot of times, and I'm speaking from experience, I didn't know about systemic racism and all these things until I got to college. And I met like people and professors and mentors that were like giving me the right books, asking me the right questions, and telling me like my struggle was not just something that I was born into. It was something that has been in place since before I was even born. And so then I understood why it was so difficult for me to go to college, why it was so difficult for me to like survive in spaces or always feel like something was off. And I think like now we have families that are going through the exact same thing, and even worse because now you got kids that you're bringing in and you're trying to navigate this world where you can't afford things, where you're like trying to like raise them the best way you can, but are consistently being criticized by educators on like what it is that you're doing. And so I think it's important for us to create these communities where we're learning together, because we also have our trauma that we're bringing into the classroom, and our parents have their traumas that they're putting onto our kids. So it's like, I think creating a space where we have more of a collaborative leadership is not just like we're making assumptions about parents, but we're bringing parents in. And like Howard said earlier, we're bringing kids in too. Like we need to make them a part of the conversation, because I think the reason we're in the situation we're in right now with this presidential era is because we lack civic engagement. Like our kids are not talking about politics. They're not talking about like the systems that they're a part of. They're kind of just moving through the motions. And then they get to talk about the real stuff when they're experiencing like that struggle as adults and like don't know how to get out of it. So I think it starts with just like having that investment in learning. And actively learning together and understanding why we're in the positions we're in. And I think in that case, parents will be more ready to become advocates and to speak up for themselves, because I think knowledge is power. So if we're learning together and they see that we're genuinely invested and in learning about them and their struggle, they would be more willing to come into the building and to work with us, as opposed to kind of like just letting us take care of their kids and then they do their job when their kids go home, if that makes sense. Sorry, that was a lot.
Howard, I see that you want to jump in, and it makes absolutely perfect sense.
Yeah, I mean, again, I want to just piggyback off the Queen, and what I think is really cool now, just looking at some of the questions, is that going back to Rais's point about the trauma that parents bring to the classroom. One thing about trauma is that you can find a way to get past your trauma, right? I'm big on shadow work. I'm a very big spiritualist, and I know that there are ways to get past that trauma. The first way that we need to look at this is in educating parents on their role and their power they have. I think the next step is empowering them to let them know that this is how you do it, and these are the ways that you can find those change, and then engage them in the process. And I think that has to be a campaign across every school district when we look at the shifting of the new paradigm, education and workforce. And there should be some type of campaign, going back to Miguel's point, marketing. We have to market this. We have to take a very strategic approach to not only, our parents and policymakers, but, really understanding that we have to shift the language and empower them with the words, empower them with strategies, but also just let them know that their education experience doesn't have to be their children's experience, by, again, educating, empowering, and engaging.
I think it's absolutely profound. And, I love the fact that we're bringing in and centering parents as human beings. I think very often within education systems, it's easy to dehumanize and objectify the people in front of us based on the community, based off of our experiences, our biases. And so creating and cultivating a very healthy communal space allows for advocacy to take root in a really robust and intentional way. And I know there's some other parents on this call, so I don't know if they want to jump in and add anything there before we pivot to our second question.
Just quickly, I think I'm just want to affirm what I've already heard from the folks on the panel, that piece around like being more strategic about when we bring parents in so that it's not performative, right? It's like, yep, we bring them in at the end to like say yay. What about at the beginning, right? Where else can they be an asset to this work and help carry some of the load? We have clients and I'm like, oh, we are missing the leverage of parents and students. Like they can understand, right? And so how are we talking to them? How are we walking them through the P-TECH program and showing them the trajectory and like where it will lead them and the wealth gap, right? Like how are we investing them and helping parents, partner with us in this work and being, so I think that requires humility is what kind of comes to mind. We're pretty smart and we're experts and we do the things, but it requires a level of humility to share that power and to share that space and to know that other people also know what's good and what's well for their kids. Howard, I see you itching.
Yeah, I want to add something, because this is shadow work. This is humility and ego. We have to. Teachers can have a huge ego, right?
Yes.
Because this is my classroom and you've never been present, and so I don't want you coming into my space. And we're territorial because we care, right? It comes from a positive place, but when it comes, the intentions as well, but the outcomes can be destructive, right? And so that ego piece has to be something that we all have to let go of, right? Our parents have an ego because of the trauma they went through. Our teachers have egos because they're fighting as a school district. They may be beefing with the teachers, et cetera. So I think that humility aspect and just understanding that we have to have a conversation of ego, right? Because that always gets in the way of good relationships, from marriages to business partners to et cetera. So, I think that's a humility and ego is something that we have to address, right? The social emotional aspect of what we're endeavoring to accomplish.
Thanks for that, Howard. Really quickly, because we're coming up on 7 o'clock. It's been great to be in conversation with you guys, and I'm not surprised the time is flying by. Riser, our last question to you. Given what we've just shared around the sense of humility and being mindful of how we're choosing to interact with each other, how do parents and educators learn to build healthy and sustainable relationships with each other?
So I'm going to bridge what you guys were just speaking about with this question. When you were talking about humility, and I thought about power, like how are we leveraging our power? And yes, teachers have an ego, but so do school leaders and the people at the district. So it's just like, I think the schools, we think about it as like hierarchical, like a hierarchy, and it's instead of it being more collaborative leadership. And so like we do make assumptions about our parents, we do make assumptions about our kids not knowing as much as we do, but it's like what I always tell my kids, there's always someone that knows something you don't know. So their experience is just as valid as ours. And I think like in order to create that space of transparency and accountability, it's more about having everyone have a seat at the table, right? Like we said earlier, having the kids there, having the parents there, but also having people from diverse backgrounds there as well that have different experiences. It's not all shared experiences. And then also, we talk about having like goals that we're setting, and just having goals that are actually powerful, not just goals that are based on testing, right? It's like, what do we want to see our kids exemplify 10 years from now? Not just when they go to high school and have to take a Regents, right? Like, it's not about testing. It's not about, I want them to be college ready, only that, right? It should be more than that. And when you talk about holistic approaches, and we're serving a community, we're not just serving kids. Like, kids do come first, but their parents are also part of that community that we're serving, and we are also a part of that community as being there. So how are we making sure that we're all good? And I think like if that is the intention and that's part of the goals that we create in that community, and consistently make sure that we're checking in and have like periodic points where it's like we know each other and we understand our needs, I think that everything else will fall into place. But I think that we just have to get out of the space of it just being like data, and go like, what type of data are we like getting? You talk about empathy interviews and surveys, like that's where we need to be, talking about who we are as people and how we can like cultivate the best versions of ourselves to set us up for success, not just success in taking a test.
Thank you, Riza. Sorry to interrupt you. I want to have us pivot over to Jacoby, who's going to have engage us in a little bit more of a communal conversation, but brilliant. Thank you so much. Jacoby?
Thanks, Reshma. So often we have these conversations and we walk away being like, yes, let's like dive in. But sometimes we work in silos, right? Or we're by ourselves. And so considering what we discussed today, I heard ideas about being more expansive and the thinking about futures in terms of college and technical schools, etc. I heard like hold on to your vision no matter what's going on politically, and like knock on doors, call whomever, to get it done. I heard this recurring theme of listening to students, and I heard this thing of being an authentic partnership with parents, authentic partnership with students, etc. And so my question to folks is, if you had to like choose one recommendation for folks, like thinking about action planning, right? Like, what is that like next right step that you would recommend people do? Or what do you think is the most important thing for folks to hold on to as we step into this next administration? Howard, would you like to start us out? Oh, Reza, I saw you come off mute.
Yeah, Raisa, please.
I got a little idea. I mean, it might not be transformational, but one of the things that I've been thinking about doing with like at least my school is creating I'm going back to Goli Muhammad, those literary societies where you're learning alongside people in your community. So having things like book clubs where we're like learning about our histories, I think like that's a start, because knowledge is power. So I think creating those spaces where we're not just educating kids, but we're bringing in families, we're bringing in like the community to also learn about like injustice, so that we can spark that advocacy bug and start getting the ball rolling.
Yeah, I'll just take the quote of Stephen Covey, begin with the end in mind, and I would start with having each school, or a school district, or whatever is more easily approachable, to create a committee of the larger corporations in the communities that have issues with hiring, those vacancies, the companies that have to recruit outside of our city, outside of our state, even outside of our country. Bring them to the table and say, hey, what are some of those needs that you have? I'm a reseller with Skillsoft, and most corporations in the world use some type of learning management system. And I would ask them, what are some of the LMS platforms you're using for your employees? And so that now we can start embedding that into our education ecosystem. So now our students are already tapped into how corporations are training people. But also, I think what would be really, really cool is going back to Rais's point, is authentically engaging parents as thought leaders and solutionists. Meaning, if we know we have areas of talent, from healthcare to education to engineering and to mechanical engineering, a lot of parents have really good ideas because they're in the field, they're industry, quote unquote, subject matter experts, and having them say, hey, I know we have an issue with the younger demographic coming in and not knowing A, B, C, D, E, F, G. So, we're leaving a lot of opportunities on the table by not even engaging our parents as practitioners and solutionists, right? They're the ones we're talking about, right? We talk about corporations, but corporations are led by parents. So I just feel that could be a very good way of having a two-pronged approach to now making it more holistic, and as Colleen mentioned earlier.
Yeah, so thanks, Howard. That was my no, but that's the reality. No,
Yes.
but you're 100% correct, and that's what I look at. We have to
Great
tap into
point.
all our resources, right?
Yeah.
If we're looking to the future, we can't close any doors, right? All of them have to remain open. Whatever's been working now, we continue, right? Improve on. Right, I mentioned it earlier, kind of revamping, looking at it, being able to sit there and say what worked, what didn't work, right? I mean, these are all things we need to look at. And so as we continue, there are things that are really working. So utilize them and now tap into new industry, right? And I think it's the one thing I will say this, and it doesn't matter whether what political party is involved. It doesn't matter. One thing I will say is this: it's just never quit expanding and growing, showing these kids that like it's never too young to start thinking about the future, right? And that's the big thing for them. They work, like we talked about, the silo, right? They do, but kids work in a silo too. They believe that their age, right, they shouldn't have to worry about anything. But the reality is, it's look at this. We joked about it earlier. I have a ninth grader. He he was 5 3 days ago in my mind, and now it's like, now he's in the final, the final countdown before college, and it's around the corner. So we should have them thinking about it. I would honestly, sincerely say as young as 6th grade, but we should be talking about it 4th and 5th grade.
I agree.
So
Miguel. I
that's
agree.
where I would go with that.
Thanks, Miguel, and thank you to all our panelists today. It's been a beautiful being in community with you all today and engaging in this very important conversation. And to our listeners, our attendees, thank you for being with us. We appreciate you. And if you'd like to learn more about us, we can be reached in the following ways. We're on IG, Facebook, LinkedIn, and you can also reach out to partnerships at equityconsulting.org or individual emails here. And if you'd like to check out our book, please do so as well. Thank you.
Jacoby, though, I just want to pause us for a second because we did have some questions come through the chat. And there is an amazing one that I think we can close on from my former teammate, Dr. Speed. It's in the chat, so if you want to take a look, or I can give voice to it. Let me find it. It's in the Q&A. And the question, is that okay, Jacoby?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't mind. I was just like, oh gosh, we're at time. Let me wrap it up. But
It's all
absolutely.
good. Yeah. Thank you. So the question is, both major political parties now talk about trade and job-focused education, right? And not just kind of that sole focus on college preparation. So it was like as the only way, right? Which is a very fair position. Do you have any concern about this focus being implemented inequitably, with poor and Black and brown communities focusing on trade education, while wealthy communities continue to focus on college preparation?
Yeah.
So
Great
can
question.
I jump in there on that real quick? Well,
Absolutely.
my apology,
Yeah,
right?
I'll
Did
take
you
a
have
quick
some-
whip around.
All right, we'll take a quick whip. All right. So yes and no, right? Because we have to decide what we're really looking for. When we talk about the areas where I grew up on Castle Hill in the Bronx, we talk about areas like that. We talk about the South Bronx. We talk about Harlem, and I'm just kind of talking locally because that's where I was like kind of born and raised.
Yeah.
The ideology is this: we can still focus on our CTE, but if we talk about dual enrollment programs, if we talk about getting these kids at minimum associate's degrees, right?
Yep.
These are the
Yep.
kind of things we need to think about, because with an associate's, a lot of these kids can get jobs almost right away, going to school at night, getting certificates, working. So I think if we talk about the old school trade, where we're just sitting there saying, okay, all schools of color are going to be doing barbering again, cosmetology. Okay, that's still, we need that, right? But we need to make sure that we're still offering this other option in there, right? Like there are
Access.
they don't have to go to a 4-year, but we do have associates programs out there, and they're cheap, right? I mean, they're
Yeah.
cheap, and they deliver on the goods when it comes to salaries. They really do. All right, that's my
Absolutely.
2 cents.
Thank you.
So I think a major issue, you know, and I love Miguel's point. I'm gonna go in a different domain. Is that they don't see value in a 2-year degree or 4-year degree, right? And so we have to, one, from a social standpoint of what education is, show that there is still value there. Because if you can go to school 4 years, get in debt 60, 70, $100,000, and then now you still don't have a job, then that's not a good argument as to why we need 4-year and 2-year education, 4-year education. But also in another, paradigm, other countries are, looking more into the certification-based training. India is investing way more talent training opportunities in AI. America is right behind them. And so from a global standpoint, we have to also look at, okay, well, globally, what are the values that are important to the American education system? And then locally, what are our values, even just socially understanding, just being, more a talented citizen. So we have to understand, to Miguel's point, that I think it's both and. I don't think it's either or. But I think one thing we don't do, even a global traveler as you ladies are, is that we don't look at what are other countries doing really well and what is the paradigm going to, because America hasn't been performing well globally for some time now across the board. And so it creates opportunities for us to really look at and re-envision, well, what is education? What's the meaning of education? What's the purpose of education? Because, have 4-year degree, but, I wouldn't preach to anybody to go to 4-year if you don't know exactly what you want to use that time for, right? So, I'll stop. This is a long conversation, but I'm going to end that there, though. Yeah.
Do I have time to respond? If I don't, I understand.
I think we do. I don't think
Yeah, go ahead, girl.
Combust. Yeah, right. Time is a construct.
That's right.
Exactly.
That's right.
Okay. I would
We
say
good.
I'm not worried about it being implemented inequitably, because I feel like it has already been implemented equitably like this whole time. So I think like the only thing that comes up, and I'm not saying that you guys are perpetuating this idea, but I kept hearing like limit in my mind. Like we don't want to limit our kids. And I feel like that's what we've been doing. And the reason we're not performing like on the same level globally is because we I'm sorry to say this, I might get in trouble, but we live in a racist country. So that tends to hold back people of color and marginalized groups. So I think that we are not reaching the full potential. Like, it happens in pockets, but I think we have to just yes, kids can go to school for 4 years, a 4-year track in college or get their associates, but there needs to be more, it needs to be more expansive. Like, there needs to be more options that are offered to them. And I think it stems from having these foundational skills that are not just work related or trade related. It's more about like holistically getting at the students to build like their confidence and their risk taking, so that they know that they can do anything. It doesn't matter what it is, whatever they feel passionate about, as long as they're being the best at whatever it is they're approaching. And I think that that's where it starts. So yeah, we have been dealing with inequity since the inception of America. So I think like now it's just a matter of finding more creative ways of combating it. Trump is not like something that's new. Like, I feel like it's been happening forever, and this is just another version of it maybe, and it's just more in your face as compared to like other presidencies that we've had. So now we just can name it easier. So yeah, that's my take on that.
Right. That really resonates with me, since time is a construct and we on CP time. I'll jump into.
This is our show. No, I'm joking.
That's right. No, it's y'all show. Yeah, that's right.
But that really resonates with me because I think about the opportunity gap, and like, yes, like both should be options to students, to every student, and as adults, as high school counselors, as career counselors, etc. in high schools, we need to make sure that our bias doesn't like sway kids one way or another, because then I think what Tony mentioned is what would happen, right? Because as a society, to Reza's point, we breathe in racist messages if we know it or not, right? From what we see on TV, from what we see on social media, from wherever, right? And so if we're not like counteracting those as we engage in the both and scenario, then we're at risk of larger marginalization. So it's like, how do we do both and have guardrails in terms of bias and keeping that in check?
Yeah, for my final word, all of that resonates, and I will add the piece around data measuring. Like, we have to know what we're doing and be able to reflect on that data, right? How are the subgroups performing? How are we privileging the most marginalized to have access to these programs? Knowing that that is the history and kind of the current state, we can't then like say, oh, let's start from a clean slate. And push some through and not, right? Because look, to your point, we're kind of just perpetuating the same system. So I think data is really important. I love that piece around, we got to keep checking our mindsets, right? That's work we do with teachers, school leaders, because a good thing can turn bad real quick. If we're like, oh, they're not motivated. Oh, these, this generation, they don't want to do hard work. Let's put them here. And I have to pause, shout out to one of our clients, Queen City Network in Jersey. They are, I want to say 99% minority, high performing district, and they've partnered with a community college and are graduating their first group of students with an associate's degree. So they have that similar program for early college learners, and it is centered unapologetically on equity. Like, no, and there's an engineering track and a CIS track specifically, right? Centering it in STEM. So I know that work is being done, and I'm super excited to continue to do that work. And it sounds like a pipeline, right? It doesn't just start at the end. It's like, what are all the pieces that contribute to the problem? Number one, can we diagnose the problem and then create a holistic solution? And then I think Reshma might have the final word.
You've all said such brilliant things. I'm like, what can I add that will be a bit more new or avant-garde?
Yeah.
I won't try to add anything new or
Okay. It's okay.
What I will say is, in hearing your reflections and thinking about something that Miguel said earlier around how do we get kids to not just become a worker, but to do the creation. It reminded me of Paulo Freire's beliefs of we want students to be creators. We want them to do the creation as opposed to being only consumers. And so I think this work that we are continuing to engage in as we move into the next 4 years is thinking about how do we get our students to not be passive consumers? How do we get our communities and families to not be passive consumers, but more so creators of experiences that will encourage their own liberation? So on that note, I want to thank you all again for joining us. Our panelists, you were wonderful. We're so glad to be in community with you. And for those of you that are watching out there, we hope that this conversation gave you a lot to ruminate on, and feel free to contact us. Be well. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Are we clear?